Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
You look good. State Senator Pat Testin of Stevens Point is a Republican seeking re-election in the 24th Senate District. Pat, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Steve, it's great to see you. How you been doing?
Good. When I talk to incumbent legislators, I ask them their top priority next session. I'm going to ask you it this way. Is it to try to get some passage of those clean water bills that got passed by the Assembly but are hung up in the Senate, or other priority? Senator.
Well, that's certainly still a priority of mine. And earlier this summer, I sent a letter to my leadership asking for a special session on the Speaker's Task Force on water quality bills. And there's still the potential opportunity that we could come back after the election. But in the event that we're unable to, I'm going to continue to push for these water bills moving into the next session and keep fighting for them, because we spent a lot of time and effort traveling around the state with the Speaker's Task Force. It was one of the first times that I know of that the Senate was included in one of these task force, because I reached out to Speaker Voss and said we should run bicameral fashion to tackle those issues. So regardless of what happens, we're going to continue to fight for the bills and hopefully get them to the governor's desk.
Did you get an answer from your letter to leadership? Because I'm sensing that there's no intent to come back before January.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, the situation that we're in right now, especially with the potential decline in revenue, granted, the numbers have bounced back, but earlier in the summer, we're still kind of in line with the economic impact related to the response to COVID-19.
Well, let's talk about that next budget. I'll make up a number. If we don't collect $1 billion in tax collections because of the pandemic, how would you fill that shortfall?
Well, I think the last thing that we would do is raise taxes. I think we would have to tighten our belts. When you take a look at what small businesses, what employees and employers have had to go through, in response to the fact that we still have 96,000 Wisconsinites that have yet received unemployment, that's a real challenge. So the last thing I would want to do is exacerbate those challenges by increasing taxes on our small businesses here in the state. So we don't have to tighten our belts. And like I get to tell many of my local officials that they in the plan for their budgets, plan conservatively.
The governor's statewide order extending statewide face masks will be in court on Monday. He extended it till November 21. What's your position on the face mask order statewide?
Yeah, it's not necessarily about the face masks that I have an issue with. It's the fact that our governor continues to throw out these emergency orders and shuts out the legislature from having a seat at the table. My primary concern is not necessarily the masks. It's what could come after them, whether or not the governor will go after and try to shut down small businesses, bars, and restaurants again, the potential to shut down K-12 education. If that would happen, that would be a real tragedy for an economy that's trending in the men's, trending in the rebound. And many of these small businesses would not survive in those shutdowns. So that's my primary concern with this emergency order. And the fact that the legislature is a complete job of the process, that's a real problem and a constitutional problem right here in the state.
Okay. You're breaking up some. I hope most of your answers come through, Senator. When we're seeing a record number of hospitalizations for COVID, hospitals are on the front lines. If you're back in the Senate voting on the next state budget, hospitals deserve a greater priority than they may have in the current budget?
Well, we'll continue to make sure we prioritize our hospitals here in the state. We're very fortunate. We have some of the best integrated health systems in the entire country. We are number one in the Midwest, and that's by and large thanks to our frontline healthcare workers. And if you remember in this last budget, we had a 40 million GPR increase into our dish payments for hospitals. So we will continue to make sure, and I'm going to advocate that at bare minimum, we maintain that level of funding went into the next biennium to get our hospitals. They've done a tremendous job here in this country. We need to make sure that they continue to provide for our patients and residents here in the state.
Okay. I'm giving you a chance to, hesitating just to be sure we can clear up some of these technical issues. But next question. Senator Kappinga has a bill. If you're a charity, an organization, or a business, you follow COVID-19 protocols, you cannot be sued over COVID-19. Are you ready to vote for that?
I'm certainly willing to take a look at it. I think by and large, it's a well-intentioned piece of legislation. From some folks I've talked to, particularly some trial attorneys, they've said, we don't know if we could ever make a case unless there was gross negligence that was occurring with a establishment or organization. It would be very hard for a judge to rule whether or not a business is liable. But again, I think it's well intentioned, and we'll continue to have conversations with my colleagues on the merits of that bill.
Okay. The debate over police reforms, we see it play out nationally, over 5 months, and even on our front door, Kenosha. Speaker's got a press conference. Senator Van Wanggaard's got 8 bills. The governor's got 9 bills. The Black Caucus has bills. Police Association has bills. My question, any specific police reforms you'd like to see enacted into law, sir?
So after the governor first released his 9 bills on police reform, I reached out to a number of my law enforcement officials, and of those 9 bills, one of them actually really built a bill that I'd authored with Representative the law enforcement standards for increasing more transparency in the hiring process. So departments weed out those individuals who may not necessarily be a good fit for law enforcement. So because I had written that bill, the governor actually reached out to me and we had a conversation. And this was shortly after the first round of riots in Madison. And I told the governor flat out, we did not have a conversation about police reform until the law and order is restored here in the state of Wisconsin. And we ran down the bills. The issue with trying to get rid of no-knock warrants. We had a situation in the Stevens Police Department earlier in the summer in which no-knock warrants resulted in a several-hour standoff. Now, if that individual had known in advance, who knows what could have happened? Law enforcement is concerned. It's going to put law enforcement at risk, put lives in danger. The banning of chokeholds, that's not even taught in the police academy here in the state of Wisconsin. And then there are a couple bills in there too that dealt with giving money toward community organizations. And the challenge that I put to the governor was, if you were so concerned about law enforcement not having a standard of training, why not allocate that money to the Department of Justice where we have existing programs, or we can allow more departments to utilize those programs. So as far as other bills that have been circulated, I mean, we still have the body camera bill legislation that we had worked on through the Legislative Study Committee with myself and Representative Taylor at the time. So there are pieces of legislation out there that are worth having, but by and large, the package that the governor put out there, law enforcement won't get behind.
Okay. States around Wisconsin legalizing medical and recreational marijuana. I know you had a CDB bill that became law, but where are you now on recreational and medicinal marijuana, Pat?
Still 100% supportive of medicinal cannabis use, and I intend to once again reintroduce legislation if I get to go back to the state legislature. I had worked on that bill with Representative Chris Taylor, with Senator Erpenbach, and I think we had a very good bipartisan back and forth and came up with a good bill. As far as recreation, my stance is the same. I'm not the area that is so concerns with what we see in other states, but I think medical is step in the right direction to provide a choice patients to benefit from it. And more importantly, making sure that is being made between a physician and a patient.
The governor's plan for what he calls a Fair Maps Commission to draw congressional legislative district lines in the future, then forward them to the legislature to be enacted. How do you feel about the governor's plan?
Don't support it. The Constitution is pretty clear that reapportionment is done by the legislature. Now, I know some will say that, well, districts are gerrymandered, and I'm more than happy to have that debate any day of the week. I especially take a look at my district, the 24th Senate district. When it was redrawn after the 2010 census in 2011, my predecessor, Senator Lassa, won this district in 2012 with nearly 57% of the vote. 4 years later, she lost it with about 46% of the vote. Now, the geographic lines didn't change, the people themselves didn't change, people didn't change. And on top of that, you look at the 2018 election results, Senator Baldwin carried my district as the Governor Walker. So people, by and large, they're willing to look past the letters behind someone's name, whether it's an R or D, and look at the person. And when you take a look statewide in 2018, Senator Baldwin carried the majority of assembly districts here in the state of Wisconsin. So had that trend carried down to those lower races, the Democrats would be in the majority. I think by and large, candidates matter. What they run on matters. And we've been very successful in resonating with the voters of our respective districts. And so I don't see this as an issue, and reapportionment should continue to be done through the legislative process.
Wisconsin is a high property tax state, which is why schools and local governments have been living with property tax caps and levies for more than 20 years. If you're back in the Capitol voting on the next state budget, should those property tax caps and levy limits stay in place?
I think the levy limits have been a very useful tool to ensure that we don't have runaway increases for individuals' property taxes. The last thing that we want to do as a state is to price people out of their homes. Individual units of government, school districts have the ability through referendum to see voters are supportive of increasing the levy limit to fund various projects. And by and large, we have seen voters across the state who have been supportive of that. So I think the levy limits are a good tool and a useful tool to be used at the state, and I'm continuing to support this moving forward.
Towns, villages, and cities, do they need revenue options to reduce their reliance on property tax? I'm referring to things like Representative Goyke's bill. If a referendum passes in Milwaukee, Milwaukee could levy a half-cent sales tax. Do local governments need revenue options?
I think instead of always trying to see what we can do to raise more revenue, let's get our economy back on the right track. That's one of the primary reasons why I do my On the Job series once a week and go work a different job in the district once a day to show what great employers that we have. And every time I work with them, they say, if we streamline the process, rid of some government red tape at the state and local level, we could expand and grow. We could hire more workers. The best way to provide more revenue for our local units, our local governments, is to have a strong economy, get business booming again, get us back to where we were before COVID. That's the best approach. Let's grow the pie.
The governor, as you know, last year recommended raising our gas tax, now 30.9 cents per gallon. It was pretty much dead on arrival in your caucus. Could you support that, or is it a dead issue?
I think it's a dead issue trying to raise the gas tax. It's not going to gain the support within the Republican Senate caucus. I also have concerns with it. With raising it by 30 cents, we would have had one of the highest gas tax in the nation. And on top of that, Steve, one of the biggest problems that we have with the gas tax and how we allocate it for our roads is that it's becoming an antiquated model. As vehicles become more fuel efficient, we're receiving less revenue. We're going to have a real challenge in this next biennium because of the significant drop in tax collections via the gas tax for the months that the state's economy is basically shut down. So that's one of the reasons why in the last budget, the Joint Finance Committee put in a provision within the transportation budget to have the DOT provide a study to find potential other revenue sources for our roads. We have to come up with a new model. What the model looks like remains to be seen, but there's no question that the gas tax is becoming an outdated way to fund the roads.
If a school district or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses? I know the Skyward example just, what was an issue 5 or 6 years ago, but should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
It sounds great on paper, Steve. I mean, by and large, I think everyone would say, yeah, let's buy Wisconsin. But in practicality, I don't know how that would be feasible. Anytime we're talking about a public works project in which taxpayer dollars are being spent on how they're going to be spent, we make sure that the best deal goes to the taxpayer. And by and large, I have the utmost faith and confidence in our Wisconsin construction companies to compete with anyone, provided they have a level playing field. So I would not support a mandate. And also, I don't know if it would even be constitutional under the Commerce Clause.
Okay. As I say, there's been times where this conversation is a little bit garbled, but here's my question. Is Central Wisconsin making major progress in access to broadband in your Senate district? Has there been major progress been made?
There has. And I know it may be a little difficult given our technical difficulties right now. We got some high winds going on here in Stevens Point. But with the Broadband Expansion Grant Program administered through the Public Service Commission, many of the providers here in Central Wisconsin, whether it's Amherst Telephone Company, Solaris, and Wisconsin Rapids, they've been very successful in receiving broadband expansion grants. In the township that I live in, the town of Hull, over the last 2 summers, they received broadband expansion grants in which essentially they're going door to door to connect people. And especially with this pandemic, with more people working from home, it's become explicitly clear that broadband expansion is just as important as our road infrastructure. And so going into the next biennium, my hope is that we'll continue to build upon our broadband expansion program at the PSC and invest more into it.
Okay, final question. Differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
Sure. So the differences between myself and my opponent, to be honest, Steve, I really don't know much about him. I know about his background in law enforcement for a short time. Other than that, there's not a lot of on his website. I can't see or find any issues whatsoever on what he's running aside from anyone but me, I guess. I do know that he made a statement in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting down in Kenosha and then came out in support of the governor's so-called police reforms. And I got to tell you, Steve, I've had conversations with individuals that served with him on the police force, and they were kind of dismayed that he sort of turned his back on his former law enforcement. But for us, our approach remains the same. We're going to continue to go out and make case to the voters of this district. We either right leadership on a message to rebuild our economy, get Wisconsin backward, and keep moving Wisconsin forward.
State Senator Pat Testin of Stevens Point is a Republican seeking re-election in the 24th Senate District. The election is November 3. Senator, thanks for taking the time to talk to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Thank you. Take care.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.